Hello and welcome to the live stream this evening. If we haven't met before, my name is James Follent, and I believe the world of Australian wine is beautiful and complex. So I create videos for wine lovers to learn more about the world of wine. Tonight on the live stream, we'll be looking at a guide to the Australian wine vintage. So the topic for this evening, a guide to the Australian wine vintage. It's an interesting time of year. Grapes are being picked off the vine. People are starting to choose when to pick their grapes, and people are trying to figure out what's going on for the best and optimal time to pick their grapes to get the best level of ripeness, to get the best wine in the bottle at the end of the process as they look and taste and see, and also deal with how many people that they can get to pick the grapes and just working through the logistics like that, and also go over some of the definitions around what is a vintage and what it means to be a winemaker, vintage and non-vintage wine. What does all the terminology mean? And we'll explore into that with the help of an article from Halliday's Wine Companion. And tonight, welcome to the stream to begin with. And tonight, I'm drinking a Semillon as part of that. And yes, Ian, you were right. It is the one and only James Follent here on the stream, talking about wine here this evening. So, part of this evening, feel free to ask questions. I'll go off on tangents for any questions I see pop up in the chat for wine and answer those as well. But I'm also looking at a guide to the Australian wine vintage for this evening and going to be going into that, the grape growing process and capturing that. So let me jump into the screen share to be able to talk about some of that. I'm excited for 2019. No, I'm drinking a 2019 McWiggins Semillon here in the glass, but I'm excited for the 2022 vintage to see how it all turns out with the weather that it's been, because the weather as part of the vintage impacts the quality of the grapes, the quality of the crop. A hailstorm can come through and damage crops and wipe out a whole bunch of vines so that they're damaged and that they won't yield any quality fruit or any fruit at all, depending on how good or bad the weather is. Wine is an agricultural product. It's something people grow and make, and depending on how the weather's been for growing the grapes that year impacts the quality of the final product of wine at the end of the day. So let's jump in to the screen share to start talking about it. So I'll be looking at Halliday's Wine Companion. I'm a member of the Halliday website. That's where I get a lot of my tasting notes. That's where I get a lot of my information. It's a thing I love to read on the weekend, my weekend reading, to learn more about wine, read different blog posts. And this one in particular caught my eye as grapes start to get picked all around Australia. So all year long, growers, viticulturalists, and winemakers work towards vintage. It's when the grapes are ripe and harvested from their vines. Vintage is an exciting yet nerve-wracking time involving long days and intense labour. The conditions must be just right, and there are many processes to follow. And we run through some of the key elements here. It is something that gets really interesting when you think about, that weather elements, and too much rain in February, it can be a bad thing for grapes. It can cause some problems just as the grapes are about to be picked. So in the case of weather changing, like Meme Man said, just change scenes. Like it is good to be back for another week of the live stream. And yes, the weather has been wild this week. Going from one direction to the other, start of the week, really hot. Now it's kind of wet and cool again. which is a bit interesting, a bit humid after the hot days as well. And it has been a nightmare for anticipating the weather forecast as well. I'm at home, so I haven't been out as much, but when I try and time a run and figure out when to run, it's like looking outside and it's like, oh, it's raining all of a sudden. So it's either too hot to run during the day or it's too wet to run when it's raining, it feels like. But managed to get 5Ks in today on my lunch break. But now that we're back on topic, let's jump back into the screen share. So the question you might have is, what is vintage? Vintage refers to the process of harvesting grapes from their vines once they're perfectly ripe. When winemakers consider grape ripeness, sugar, acid, and tannin levels are measured to determine when they are ready to be picked. Vintage occurs each year, and in Australia it runs from about 2 to 4 months depending on the region and grape varieties involved. Optimal temperatures leading up to and during vintage are pivotal to how the year's harvest transpires. Threats of heat, rain, hail, and frost can harm the grapes, create disease, and at worst, spoil the fruit. Once vintage is complete, winemakers then employ a range of different methods and techniques to turn the fruit into wine. So, what makes a wine vintage? A vintage wine consists of grapes that were all, or for the most part, grown and harvested in a single year. A wine's vintage can be found on its label, communicates this. A wine's vintage found on its label. Yeah, there we go. Let's fix that sentence. A vintage wine consists of grapes that were all, or for the most part, grown and harvested in a single year. A wine's vintage, found on its label, communicates the year. And on its label communicates this year, that year that was the vintage that it was picked. For instance, grapes that were picked in the 2020 vintage therefore featured 2020 on the resulting wine label. Although most grapes are harvested in a single period, small portions can include previous years, the exact amount varying between countries. In Australia, a vintage wine requires 85% same year grapes. That's something that I've learned. I didn't know that. In Australia, a vintage wine requires 85% of the same year grapes. I didn't know that it was a threshold. I always assumed it was 100% of the time and 100% of the year that the grape came from. And sometimes then we get to start to think about vintage wine versus non-vintage wine, and what does that mean? Because non-vintage wine means it's a blend of all these other wines going into that. So vintage versus non-vintage wine. Vintage wines communicate the intricacies of an entire growing season through taste, which can often be completely different from the previous year's wine. If winemakers wish to produce consistent wines in regards to their taste and quality, blending multiple years together can sometimes achieve a desired style. These wines are labelled non-vintage. Non-vintage wines are usually a blend of 2 or more wines, and a common example celebrated worldwide is champagne. That is labelled non-vintage or NV. Another example would be fortified wines, which are often non-vintage. And to jump into a question from the chat. Does red grapes make a different wine taste compared to almost black grapes or green grapes? Yes, there's all different types of grape varieties. And if I pause to get up for a moment to grab a book off my shelf from the World Atlas of Wine, I'll try and hold some of that up to the camera and show you what that looks like. So let's see how that goes. I'm gonna have to turn my screen effects off because that's not working out. So let's just change scenes to one Sure. I may not have added the right track to live stream to that footage, so thanks for the call out there. But in the book, we have terroir that we talk about, which is the place that the grape comes from, the land that goes into it, that goes alongside it, and then we have the different grape varieties that are grown in the soil as well. So you can have a huge different about varieties of grapes going alongside that. So looking at something that looks particularly black here, on this particular one, we can get Cabernet Franc. If I get back close to my camera and try and not get that filtered out through the background, as well as Sangiovese is a darker style grape. But then we also have like a green grape that's Riesling. So the supermarket grapes aren't necessarily grapes you turn into wine. I'm not 100% sure what type of grapes are the supermarket grapes and if that would work at all. But the different grape varieties make different wine tastes. So the different types of grape will determine the taste of the wine more so than just the color of the grape skin. But then also the color of the grape skin can also impart things like tannin, which is a prickly sensation that you get on your tongue after drinking wine, which is kind of like if you imagine like a black cup of tea, no milk, no sugar, a nice strong black cup of tea. That prickly sensation you get on your tongue can come from the grape skins, and that is often grape skins that are put in with red wine as you think about that process. So it can depend as part of that with what makes the wine taste in a certain way. And hopefully I fixed that hearing issue now as well, now that I'm back on my main scene. We jump back in. I put the book down. So that does not fall over in the background. Because that'll make a loud bang, and then you know exactly what it is if it does go toppling over. Let's jump back into the screen share. Let's look at the history. Let's look at the history of Australian wine vintage. Australia has long been a producer of world-class wines. The first vine cuttings to arrive in Australia were brought over in 1788 by Governor Phillip of the First Fleet from South Africa. Despite what many had hoped, these vines did not produce the first Australian wine vintage. Sometime later, in the early 1800s, John MacArthur planted Pinot Gris, Frontignac, Guice. I'm not even sure how to pronounce those two properly. I'm going to have to learn that. Frontignac and Guice. They're new. I'm not familiar with those two grape varieties, so they mustn't have worked out in Australia. Verdelho and Cabernet Sauvignon vines on his property in Camden Park near Sydney. This marked the first commercial vineyard and winery in Australia producing examples of Australian wine that were imported around the world. The 1830s marked an important time in Australian wine history when the Hunter Valley wine region was established. Thanks to James Bubsey, after returning from France and Spain with an honourable collection of European varieties, he planted the vines, which included the famed Australian Shiraz as part of that. And you'll notice if you ever go up to Hunter Valley for a week away, you'll notice that some of the prominent grape varieties planted throughout the Hunter Valley are Shiraz, Semillon, and Chardonnay. I'm drinking a Semillon from McWiggins from the 2019 vintage, which means it was picked in the year 2019 as part of that process, which is delicious. In Australia, I think, I haven't tasted many Semillons around the world, but from what I've read, Australia produces some of the best Semillons in the world, especially from the Hunter Valley. because of the unique soil complexity and composition they have, along with the weather that helps produce some crisp, beautiful, lovely wines that have incredible aging potential as part of that. So moving on to thinking about some of the wine regions and the different climates that go with them, and looking overall at the Australian vintage climates. Wine is produced right around Australia within several climates. Australian wine therefore shows varied complexities parading different terroirs. So terroir is that land that we were talking about before. And we jump across to answer the question, what is terroir? What does it mean? Well, terroir is a French word which cannot be adequately translated into any single English word, simply because it covers a multitude of factors. Bruno Prats, the former proprietor of Chateau Cos d'Estournel in the Medoc, explained it thus. The French notion of terroir looks at all the natural conditions which influence the biology of the vines and thus the composition of the grape itself. The terroir is the coming together of the climate, the soil, and the landscape. It is a combination of an infinite number of factors: temperatures by night and by day, rainfall distribution, hours of sunlight, slope and drainage, to name but a few. All these factors react with each other to form, in each part of the vineyard, what French wine growers call a terroir. A terroir determines the character of wine. Man, its quality. I got my inflection wrong on that. Terroir determines the character of a wine. Man determines the wine's quality. Man, its quality. The late Peter Sickle, former president of the Grand Cru de Bordeaux, put it even more succinctly when he said, terroir determines the character of wine, man, its quality. It lies at the heart of the French appellation system itself, built up 1,000 years of practical experience and observation. The system has led to a most precise and detailed delineation of quality, to the identification of a limited number of grape varieties considered to be especially suited to the terroir and the climate in a particular area, and to the exclusion by force of law of all others. It has also led to the prescription of pruning methods and to the specification of maximum yields and minimum alcoholic strengths, which means that it is highly regulated there in France. But if we go back to the article that we were in, we were looking at the Australian vintage climates. So complexities parading different terroirs. James Halliday says that each terroir, small or large, is unique and hence not duplicated anywhere else in the world. The hot climate of the Northern Territory proves difficult for viticulture, although there are some small vineyards operating there. Below lists the major wine states of Australia and their specific climates. Arguably, the heart of Australian wine, South Australia is home to many famed wine regions, including the Barossa Valley, Clare Valley, McLaren Vale, Eden Valley, Adelaide Hills, and Coonawarra. Overall, the areas enjoy warm, dry summers with winters that are cool, mild, and wet. Although every region has its own specific conditions and varying climates. The Riverland, for example, can be very warm, while the Adelaide Hills has a cooler climate. Rainfall is minimal overall. On the other hand, you've got New South Wales, and New South Wales is the birthplace of Australian wine, with vineyards spanning cool climate regions including Orange, the Canberra District, and Hilltops, and also warmer regions such as the famed Hunter Valley, which also gets higher rainfalls. Areas such as Mudgee and Cowra are known for both being warm and dry. We also have Victoria. Victoria has the most wineries than any other wine producing state in Australia. It's known for its exceptional cool climate regions, including the Yarra Valley, Mornington Peninsula, Macedon Ranges, and the King Valley and Alpine Valley. Victoria also has a number of highly regarded warmer regions, such as Rutherglen, to name just one. The Murray-Darling is a landmark in Victoria for its warm, dry climate and produces flavour-packed grapes. And now we jump over to Western Australia. Western Australia generally has a temperate climate thanks to the cool breeze of the Indian Ocean. The Great Southern is the largest wine region of Australia at 39,007 square kilometres and includes 5 sub-regions: Potton-Gurup, Mount Barker, Albany, Denmark, and Franklin River. These areas differ with various climates and are overall the coolest in the state. Great Southern also experiences less rainfall than the maritime climate of Margaret River, similar to Bordeaux in France during a dry vintage. A warmer wine area in the state is the Swan District, the warmest in Australia, which means Great Southern has potential comparability to Bordeaux in a dry vintage as well. And yes, that wine looks extra delicious today. Crisp, refreshing, chilled straight from the fridge. And speaking of chilled, let's look at Tasmania. Tasmania is the coolest wine region in the country and Australia's southernmost state. Many parts are cold and perfect for the production of dry whites and sparkling wines. There are warmer regions in Tasmania too, such as the Coal River Valley and Freycinet Peninsula. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Freycinet Peninsula. Pinot Noir from Tasmania is fast becoming known as some of Australia's finest, and sparkling wine is also something that's popular in Tasmania and is becoming more and more well known around the world. So you can find some expensive but great value sparkling wines from Australia made out of Tasmania. And Queensland, although a predominantly hot place, Queensland is home to both cool and warm wine regions. The cool climate Granite Belt even receives snowfall at times, whereas the South Burnett is warmer and also where the majority of Queensland's wine grapes are grown. Both regions represent different climates and produce contrasting wines of equal quality. And that's kind of just the general overview of each of the different places that you can look at. There's also more specificities around the Australian wine vintages, and you get to look at, for a given year, for a given region, you can see what is going on. So if I pull up red wine for New South Wales, I can see in the Hunter Valley, Hunter Valley was a particularly good year in 2014 for Hunter Valley red wine, whereas Orange didn't have the best growing conditions with a score of 5 out of 10, whereas the Hunter Valley Red scored 10 out of 10 for growing conditions for that particular year. Some wines that I'm excited about, I have some Tyrrell's Vat 9 Shirazes from the 2011 vintage, which is also highly rated here as well. And that just kind of gives a guide to how good relatively the years were for grape growing, and some of those years with those 10s, if they were good, are potentially the wines with great value and wines that will go the distance in terms of aging longer and sitting longer in the cellar. So something that could stretch 10 or 20 years might start to go 20, 30 and stretch longer and age longer because of the quality of the growing season. And if we think about the Australian wine vintage by varietal, all the different grape varieties, there are many different ways to make wine, some more common than others. The red wine making process is similar to white, with rosé and sparkling production using techniques of their own. So, the red and white wine production starts with sampling, might involve someone going up to a vine, picking out the grapes, taking the grapes, sampling the grapes, seeing how much sugar's in them, seeing if it's ripe, see if the grapes are ready to go, and then it moves on to harvest time. Once the grapes have been sampled, that they're good, that they're ready, then it starts to be picking, and that's when we move into the harvest, when we actually pick the wine. And after the harvest has happened, then the wines are being brought in. So you can be harvesting wine in parallel to the crushing and the pressing. If you've got a certain volume, bringing tons and tons and tons of grapes in to make wine. I was even looking at, to go off on a tangent, got a pen and paper out and looked at a research article about the costs of making wine, and it's feasible. It costs about $1,000 to buy a ton of grapes on average, from an article that I was reading. So I could potentially buy a ton of grapes if I got an NFT that sold well, and then make my own wine out of that as an idea that's brewing in my mind for a future project, about what that could look like. And that could make 1 ton of grapes can make about 600 litres of wine, which means you might have 300 litre barrels if it was a red wine, which then translates into 750 mils per barrel per bottle. Trying to do some quick math, but also wanting to look over at the pad of paper that I was writing on when I was doing it originally. You get a lot of wine. So 300 litres of wine will translate into over 300 or 600 bottles of wine in one production. And if you sold each bottle for like $5, you'd make 3,000 compared to the $1,000 investment into the grapes. But there's also many other costs in the process. That's not the raw thing. But I've got an NFT project that's brewing in my mind about how I might be able to make wine. I've just got to figure out how to execute it. That's a different story. You bring all the pieces together. But let's go back into the method, jump back into the screen share. So red and white wine production. The crushing and the pressing is what helps pull the grapes out as part of that. And it leads to fermentation. And fermentation is something that takes not that long, actually. It actually takes like only a few weeks, I think. But then you've got to keep it and look after it and do things like pump overs, where you pump the wine over the skins to keep everything working and keep all that science happy, to make sure the fermentation goes smoothly and things don't go wrong with that reaction happening where sugar is converted into alcohol and the wine is made. And then with red wines, you'll often put it into barrels for aging to help mature, oak barrels to help develop flavor, complexity, and then filtration from some of the sediment, some of the reactions in the wine will be something that happens to then allow the wine to be of clear and quality enough that you put the wine into bottle, get it bottled, ready to go before it's dispatched and then sold and consumed by people. So let's just, instead of me explaining that diagram, dive into some of the text and what that says. So once the red wine grapes are at the desired level of ripeness, they are harvested and commonly destemmed. Although many producers also work with whole bunches, the grapes are then crushed and placed in an environment where yeast is able to grow. The skins are kept on the grapes, producing a deep color. Fermentation commences once the yeast has consumed the sugars, turning to alcohol. Red wines are fermented at higher temperatures than white wines. The grapes are then pressed to extract the juices. Aging can run between 4 months to 4 years before the wine is bottled. Fining can occur during aging to clarify the wine. At this stage, additives may be used. The wine can also then be filtered and finally ready for bottling. Although many bottles go through the fining and filtration stages, many do not, which can result in wines that are cloudy in appearance. You can get some funky wines that have stuff floating around inside them because they haven't been filtered. The white wine making process differs slightly from reds. The main difference is that white wine production commonly uses grapes without their skin during fermentation. Another is that the wine is fermented at a cooler temperature, capturing the fruit flavor profiles. After picking and destemming, the next step is to remove the skins from the grape by crushing them. The grapes are pressed and the juice is collected before fermentation occurs. Depending on the wine style being made, it will then be aged, which can add depth and complexity. Most white wines are commonly filtered before they are bottled to clear any cloudy qualities and stabilize the wine. So the Semillon is beautiful and clear. If you can see that in the glass as part of that, you can see part of me coming through as well. Make sure I'm on the right angle. Look at that going on there with the clarity. So you can pretty much see through it with what's going on. It's a nice clear wine. Delicious, fermented at a lower temperature as well as part of that process. So rosé and sparkling wine production. There are many ways to produce rosé wine, and the most common being the maceration method. This method refers to red wine grapes being grown and harvested for the specific purpose of making rosé wine. They are also picked at a lower Brix compared to other grapes, which is purposeful to keep acidity levels up and sugar levels down. The grapes are left to sit for a considerably shorter amount of time than usual, with the end result being a soft pink coloured wine rather than deep red. Another method is the Sagny method. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, translating to bleeding in French, which is a byproduct of red wine. In this method, a small amount of juice is bled off after a few hours of fermenting. The remaining juice will increase in concentration levels and create deep red wine, while the separated juice can be enjoyed as rosé. A less popular method is blending, which is when a small amount of red wine is added to the white wine during production. Sparkling wine production can seem technical. There are 6 methods most often used that each result in different style of sparkling wine. You'll most often hear of the traditional method used for champagne and the tank method used for prosecco. Other methods include the transfer method, the ancestral method, continuous, and carbonation methods. These involve many intricate steps and can be discovered on our sparkling wine page if you want to read more. Looking at the wine vintage timeline, the timeline below shows the expected months that each Australian state will be in vintage, as climate can change unexpectedly each year. This timeline is also subject to change. Winemakers are constantly aware of the weather and continue to reshape their process to produce the finest wines possible. James Halliday says that for Australia, exceptions such as Coonawarra to one side, climate is the most significant factor outside the vigneron's control, impinging on the grape quality and wine style. All wine styles and James Halliday quotes included within this article are taken from the James Halliday's Wine Atlas of Australia, another one on my wish list. Yes, over 600 bottles of wine is an insane amount. Far out, yep, that is insane. And another question, do you add things like cinnamon into your grape juice while it ferments or no? Cinnamon, no, doesn't go into the fermentation process. There are other things that are added, so like sulfur to help preserve and stabilize the wine. Sometimes a particular strain of yeast. It's like almost imagine all the yeasts coming to a party and having different names and they do different things. You might add the bob yeast, a particular strain of yeast for a wine to produce a particular style that you want to help the fermentation get going. Another way of doing it, people have, instead of aging wine in oak, sometimes people add oak chips to like a stainless steel tank of wine to give the oak flavor. But cinnamon, not often. That gets into the territory, I think it's gin, or it's a distilled spirit where different things are added to give it its flavor as part of the distilling process. But with wine, things aren't really added like cinnamon whilst it ferments. You can do something different where you can make mulled wine. I'm looking forward to doing a video about mulled wine this coming winter, where I actually add things like cinnamon, nutmeg, oranges to make a nice warm mulled wine for winter, for a cold winter's day, for something that's warm, refreshing, hearty, spiced wine. So you don't often see that. You might see things like in a spiced mead, which isn't technically wine because wine needs to be made from grapes. It's like fermented honey or alcoholic honey water or honey juice. But that's something similar where you'll probably see spiced added, but no, cinnamon is not often added when things are in the fermentation stage. It's something you might add to make a mulled wine later on as part of that. So there's a huge variety the Australian regions and vintages. We're going into the 22 vintage. What about a wine for a hot day? There's a question that's just come in. What about a wine for a hot day? That is a great question. A wine for a hot day that I'd pick up is something like a Semillon, something that's cool, crisp, and refreshing. Or I'd also think about something like a sparkling wine on ice that's on cooler temperatures, poured into a glass to serve to people. So they're wines that you'd serve below 12 degrees Celsius from the fridge, from a esky or from a tub of ice to keep them cold so that they're nice and refreshing. I'm starting to see Australians experiment more with some chilled red wines, some lighter styles like Pinot Noir as part of that. So having a chilled Pinot Noir or a Grenache on a hot day as well at a barbecue. Rosé is also a go-to. I think rosé is one of the most purchased and consumed drinks in France. Rosé is more popular than any other wines. So you could say rosé all day. As part of that, rosé is another great drink. I had a picnic recently out and about where I brought a bottle for lunch of the McGuigan Zero Rosé, so non-alcoholic. and had a glass of that with me at the park, which was crisp and refreshing to go along with my kind of salad and sandwich, which was lovely. And it's finding wines that complement the food that you're often eating on the hot days or a hot barbecue as part of that. That's do things that kind of cooling, crisp, and refreshing along the way. And something you'll find that's controversial that I'm going to cover in another video is, do you put ice in the wine or not? Is that a faux pas? Is putting ice in wine a big no-no? Or is it something that you can get away with? It's really personal choice as a little hint, but that's something to cover in another video as part of that. But it's a great question about what about a wine for a hot day with what you'd consider. I'm out of wine at the moment. Glass is empty, but the bottle is still in the fridge, staying cool, staying refreshing, ready to go. And you'll often, in the sparkling or in the white wine making process, oxygen is something that causes problems with the wine. So often they'll try and move that through the process pretty quickly to minimize and avoid the amount of oxygen that gets to the wine, so the wine doesn't oxidize and go bad or go funky during the wine making process, because the white wine grapes can be a bit more sensitive during the wine making process. But yeah, feel free to ask any questions in the chat. If you're watching on the replay, leave questions in the comments section below about that. What wine region are you most interested? Let me know in the comments below what wine region you were most interested in as part of that. And feel free to ask any more questions in the chat. I can ask them on the live Q&A. I aim to stream 9 p.m. every Wednesday night, Australian Eastern Standard Time, or Australian Eastern. Kind of off topic. I'll get to that question in a moment. Australian Eastern Standard Time, Australian Eastern Daylight Time, whatever we're in. 9 p.m. Sydney time is when I aim to live stream each Wednesday night to talk about a topic, do something in depth, to talk about something, as well as answer questions along the way for the live stream and go back and forth on that, which is a little bit of fun. And if you're enjoying the content I'm creating about wine, please consider subscribing for more wine videos from me, because I love creating videos for wine lovers to learn more about the world of wine. And if you subscribe and hit that bell notification, you'll be notified of all future videos I post and get to be part of this community of wine lovers on a journey to learning more about the world of wine, which is exciting. And that is Let's go. And kind of off topic. Great question. Kind of off topic, but do you have a second choice of alcoholic beverage besides wine? For a time there, I think my second choice would be whiskey. I've got some curiosities about like sake, Japanese rice wine. I had something like that was interesting. For a while there, I was into vodka. Not as much anymore, but just because vodka needs to be flavored, it isn't often tasteless. But it is strong, great for gargling with and disinfecting a sore throat. I think whiskey would be my go-to second choice for an alcoholic beverage. I'm not really a huge fan of beer. Very rarely have a beer, but whiskey would be my second. Ooh. And what is my favorite pairing of food and slash dessert with wine? I remember one of my most eye-opening, when I started thinking about wine pairings, it was a suckling pig Shiraz. So it was a Swedish Shiraz paired with some dark chocolate, if I remember correctly, instead of milk chocolate. where take a sip of wine and then you take a bite of chocolate and then you took another sip of wine and you saw how the flavors between the chocolate and the wine work together to create something new and exciting. I think one of my go-tos now, though, in terms of like a meal that takes me, like, it's transcendent. I'm talking it up, but you'll have to experience for yourself. Getting like find a delicious piece of meat that you like. So like steak, lamb, pork, chicken. Figure out what meal that you love in terms of like a nice juicy steak cooked just right, or a piece of beef cheek, or lamb on the bone, slow roasted, like a. I'm thinking about all the things I can cook now, and all the things I can pair with wine. But pairing a hearty meat dish with a bottle of Shiraz or Cabernet Sauvignon with some Tannin on it just goes beautifully. So I tend to go through the process of going through and looking at what wine do I like, what's going to go well with it, and I'll tend to go Cabernet Sauvignon or Shiraz and then pick a meat pairing. If I'm at a restaurant, I'll ask a sommelier for a recommendation of, hey, I'm thinking of getting this, what wine would you recommend, and rely on their judgment because they picked the wine list, which is interesting. Dessert wine pairings. I had something, I've got to look it up on my phone actually. I think it was a Spanish wine that blew me away, otherwise tawny. I think it was tawny with cheeses, was something that surprised me, kind of the sweet with the savoury. It was quite nice. So a sweet glass of tawny at the end of a night with the cheese board. Oof, delicious seeing the flavours come together as well. Sweet wines. I've also done kind of sweet wines poured over gelato or ice cream, which is interesting. But that's that might be top 3. But using cheeses for dessert with a sweet wine pairing is something that I love. And is there a ballpark? This is a great question. Let's go off onto a big tangent here. Let's go into the chat. Let's deep dive into NFTs. I'm liking this next question. Is there a ballpark for a James Follent NFT launch? Maybe. Is a great question. I have short-term view of figuring things out. So here's my off-the-cuff elevator pitch. Tell me if you don't understand anything. Hit me up in the chat. I'm bouncing off ideas off you. I want you to hear, dissect it, ask questions. This is my big pitch. So, I make scented candles. I've got something there that I can attach utility to. So I'm thinking for my first project, instead of Ethereum, because you can pay more gas price in Ethereum than you can for the actual Ether and the Ethereum. So Ethereum's just like wildly overpriced for me in terms of the transaction fee. Like it's too much when you're paying $100 for the NFT plus $100 in gas to buy it. Like imagine going and getting a coffee and paying $3 for the coffee plus paying $3 in transaction fees. Like it's disproportionate. Or even worse, imagine paying $3 for the coffee and then paying $10 in transaction fees. Like blows my mind. I'm hoping layer 2 solutions help work that out in the NFT space to reduce the cost of buying NFTs with Ethereum, with smart contracts. But how would it sound? Let me do some quick math in the background here. Solana. So Solana is a blockchain that I've been interested in, and Solana has something that prioritizes low cost transaction fees. So jumping into a screen share to go off onto my NFT project tangent. Still brainstorming the idea, still trying to think about what's gonna go on. But it's like all NFT projects seem like they have a Discord server going on to build the community before they launch the project and mint something, which I find interesting, is an interesting concept. Um, I'm thinking of potentially trying to launch, like July 2022 might be a mint date as I think about things, for a small project. So like less than 100 NFTs, something exclusive, something that I'm not going to do again. I'm thinking, like, how much is too much? Like, would you pay $25 for an NFT? Is that too high, too low? Let me know in chat. Is $25 a good price point for that? Because I'm liking the low average transaction cost here of the Solana network and what goes into powering that for an NFT project. As part of that, it's something that tickles my fancy, as I think about that, about what that means. But I'm also thinking about attaching it to utility. So if I had bronze, silver, and gold for frames, for every NFT someone buys and or mints, that a gold NFT would give you 25% off, silver NFT would give you 10% off, and a bronze NFT would give you 5% off scented candles on my website with a special coupon code. And that's like, you buy the NFT, you get 25% off as long as I sell scented candles. And then to build in more utility, I've come across something called Grape. Be even $100 NFT, but cheaper variants will sell nicely. Yep, I'm thinking cheap, entry level, test the waters, build a community, get in early. Don't have something ridiculous. High as $40 to $50. That's a price range. Good to know, because I was thinking 25 as a sweet spot at the beginning to build out an NFT that people could mint, which might, if I look at Sol, Solana to AUD. So CoinGecko, because I'm just looking at what the Solana price is. So effectively, I had 0.1 Sol, $15. So potentially 0.2 Sol would be 30. The 0.15 Sol at the current price could be a sweet spot where you mint it, or 30. I think I just like the sound of 0.1 as part of that. Yeah. $50 is comfortable for starting off with NFTs. So you think you could pump that up with some 25? I've still got to figure this out about NFTs. Like, can I charge different prices for mint straight off the bat? I'd rather offer like a low price and have them all sell and build a community as part of that, to have people invested in it. And do you own any nice watches by any chance? So, going off on a tangent, I'm actually in one of the NFT projects that I'm looking at. Let me just go back to I've gone off on a tangent from wine. I don't have any kind of super nice watches. I've got an Apple Watch Series 7, but like nothing like a Rolex. As part of that, crypto dials.io. But my brother's given me a watch for a gift. I got a watch from a Kickstarter project, which was awesome. Let's double check I got the right website. There we go. Let's screen share this. So Crypto Dials is an NFT project that I'm looking at the moment. They're still working on it. Like I'm in the Discord for this NFT project. Crypto Dials. The idea is that they create an NFT to sell a watch. Coming off that question, so no, I don't. Like, I've got an Apple Watch Series 7 on at the moment, but I don't have like a Rolex. I've got like a Nixon and another one. I threw out the card for it today. It's not in arm's reach. But the other watch was a Kickstarter project that I had, and one of the reasons I'm excited about this project is they're looking at creating an NFT, but the NFT has utility and it's attached to a watch, which is an idea that I find captivating, and I'm going to be really interested to see where this project goes as well. So you can find the Discord links here if you want. It's at cryptodials.io. If you want, as part of that, it's very early on. I only saw this project launched in January, so it's like less than a month old. I'm also looking around at Australian crypto projects to see how they're doing things, how they're working things out as part of it. And Ian enjoys a nice clean watch, mate. Enjoy nice clean watches. So that they'll be interested. Oh, here's the phasing of the project. So what I'm doing when I look at some of these NFT projects is trying to understand how they go through the project of like website, social media launch, working on smart contracts, doing a teaser of the NFT dials, building community, physical utility, and team members on the project, basic trait review, community trait selection, smart contract finalized. It's really interesting to see how they come together. Imagine using the NFT as an Apple Watch wallpaper that is exclusive to you because it is one-off. That is a great idea. I'm not even sure. Like Twitter, I've almost been tempted to mint my own profile picture, one of them PFPs, the profile picture NFTs, personal profile pictures, and have a one-of-one of like me. So like I basically Photoshop a photo of me and make myself into an NFT that I use on my profile pictures, just to say I own a photo of myself for the humor and understanding the process of minting. But yeah, so like that project has phases as part of it. Like it's a very ambitious. I'm also like how many will actually execute, how will it come together with that to watch. Like if I jump back into the screen share, like how's this like watch project gonna come together? So this is one I'm probably gonna jump into. I'm hot on it. I'm Kirk Lucas is someone I'm a big fan of. Kirk Lucas is also, if you watch Peter McKinnon on YouTube, Kirk Lucas is the editor, and that's how I found out about this project as part of that. So that's awesome. He does a great job. Love his design. Love that aesthetic that goes with it. So excited about that. But if I jump back into kind of what I was thinking with different price points, thinking about like $25, $40, potentially like, yeah, something that has value to it. 0.5 Sol might be a bit much. I want something affordable in Australian dollars that you can do. 0.4 would be coming in towards 60 Australian dollars at the moment. I think 0.1 is the price point that intrigues me. Because if I was to go 0.1 times 15 times 100, I'd be a little bit in there. But what I'm most interested by about using Solana and the Solana blockchain, I go into my screen share, is I've come across the Grape protocol, and it's a protocol for building token-based membership communities on the Solana blockchain. So imagine you can only get into a particular Discord channel. Like, rate this idea out of 10. You have to own a particular NFT to be able to get verified to be able to be in a particular Discord channel with kind of like a founders of the project. What do you think? Hot or not? Rate it out of 10. Let me know what you think. Because Grape is a decentralized social networking protocol to create, reward, and secure any online community by harnessing the power of Solana. Grape is a currency that powers the Great Ape social ecosystem and is a utility token that we can use to access our suite of community building features. These features will also be offered to other communities in exchange for project tokens or for burning or spending Grape. So it's a really interesting idea. It perplexes me about like what's going on. I'm in this Discord as well, trying to learn about it, trying to understand what's going on with this particular project, how things are working as part of it. But I'm not sure. Like once I've figured out the mechanics, it's like, yeah, you need an ID to get in the club. That's a good way of showing it. So you have to have your ID, you have to have your ticket to be able to access it. Yeah. And I think, yeah, I think you're right there that it's going to be something like you could have a ticket for an event. So like your NFT probably won't just be like, the thing to get into a Discord server. It might be something to get into a particular video game, could get you into a virtual concert, could be like a ticket to get you into a real concert in real life, to go through that and enjoy that, go to a real thing. Because it's a digital receipt and a digital record. It's something that's difficult to make fraudulent. There's a record of it on the blockchain of who owns it. You've got your wallet address that's connected to it. There's a lot of things going on to it. So it's like your exclusive pass to get in it. And it's, yes, like you need an ID to get into the club, something unique to you. You have to own a particular one to get into it. And I'm also thinking of how do you have like a tiered membership system? The nut that I'm trying to crack long term is how could I have something called a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization that is like a wine club. So imagine democratizing the wine club experience where you get to pull a bunch of people's crypto together to then buy purchases at wineries, but having multiple wine memberships mean you can get like a 25% discount on a bottle of wine from a winery for buying in bulk and having a membership there. But then you have a discount on that. So then your members can buy an NFT for that wine and they're buying that NFT at a 25% discount compared to going to BWS or Dan Murphy's. But then you also try and offer the utility for perks along the way for clubs, experiences, exclusive events, exclusive tastings, potentially like private live streams to like a Discord or a community group as well to talk about wine. So that's kind of the end goal of trying to figure out how that works. How does this become like a DAO? And potentially having my own token, having my own cryptocurrency, not building my own, but making my own and giving it utility. How do I create utility for tokens is kind of the end game, but that's like Marvel phase 3. I'm at phase 1 now, trying to think about it. All Australian owned. Yep, that's that. A picture of future investors and wine lovers all being part of a community and all Australian owned. And one of the things I love about that idea and that idea of a DAO, imagine everyone voting on like, hey, where do we want to get our like wine membership? Like people in the community can be putting up proposals about how resources get spent as part of that so that you determine, hey, we want to renew the membership for a particular wine club for this year. And then it's like, what order do we want to buy 12 bottles of this or 24 bottles or 100 bottles of this, the community? And then everyone votes, but then also people get to reap the benefits of the rewards based on what they choose and what they vote. So bringing the community together in a powerful way, but also trying to translate into physical events. So that's kind of the long-term thing, but I've got to figure out how to actually execute that, and not just kind of execute it, but like get some runs on the board, get some at-bats, some hits, some home runs to show that I've got a track record of building and executing a crypto project. And I think the first part of that is going to be going through and making my own NFTs as a proof of concepts to be able to get discounts on my scented candles. So here's this gateway, but then the scented candles is the thing that will get you into that that next project. That effectively the first NFT you buy will get you whitelist spots for all future projects that I do. So it's a guaranteed way to get a whitelist spot for any of my future projects as well. So that it's basically reserved access for the mint because you own that first batch of NFTs. So getting in early at the ground floor and having future value and future utility years into the future for access. Think way down the line, if your crypto endeavors explode with a community of people, you could hold free wine events. Only catch is you need to be a holder of an NFT or token. 100%. That'd be the vision of if the tokens were bringing in enough income and bringing in enough exclusivity and all like the secondary market royalties from selling and reselling to other people in the crypto space over 30, 50 years, that would bring in a ton of benefits. Also, being able to use a pool of resources in the decentralized finance world, figuring out basically how to potentially create like a liquidity pool to be able to create an easy way to swap cryptocurrency in and out with my particular token, with smart contracts and things. I'm doing a lot of reading and learning about that, but using crypto to like a financial market effectively to be able to earn money with things. You don't want to just hold, like you don't take cash and put it under the bed to save money. You've got interest and inflation that you got to watch out for, because inflation eats the purchasing power away of your purchases and your money as costs of living rise over and over. So how do you not make that mistake with crypto? How do you put the crypto to work so that you get a yield off it? That's one thing I'm thinking about in the background as well. But thank you for tuning into the live stream. That was me going off the cuff, improvising, thinking about sharing a little bit about publicly for the first time on a live stream for what the NFT project could look like. I think I'm going to focus on the NFT in my first project being about utility over art. I'm not a great artist. I just want to build something. I want to be a good operator and an average artist. But building an NFT that delivers utility over beauty, I can figure out art in the other projects and things to come about how that could work. And I've still got to articulate a business plan to be able to figure out how I actually deliver value for people and value for a community so people want to be part of it. Because if I'm just doing something to try and make money off crypto, that's not fun. I've got to have a vision, got to have a mission, have something clear that people can be a part of, something they can believe in, something they can get behind and that they can join in. And that's what I'm figuring out the why of bringing people together for wine. Because I figured out the why of my YouTube channel, and that's important because I make videos for wine lovers to learn more about the world of wine, because I believe the world of wine is beautiful and complex, especially Australian wine, which is the why behind making all these wine videos. So it's something I want to keep doing, keep it happening, keep creating the content to learn more about wine. So if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe to the channel to learn about the world of wine. Ask any questions in the comments below, and I might be able to answer one of those in a future video. Otherwise, thank you for tuning in this evening. I live stream 9 p.m. Sydney time on Wednesdays. I try and have a stream diving into things and also doing a live Q&A along the way, sometimes going off on a tangent, talking about something else, and then bring it to the main topic as well. And I love interacting with the chat, answering their questions, having that engagement going back and forth. We covered watches, we covered NFTs, and we covered a guide to the Australian vintage, thinking about the wine and the picking season happening. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Enjoy the jazz music on the way out, and I'll see you in the next video.